Hello and welcome to Radical with me, Amol Rajan. What we're trying to do on this show is really invite you to engage with some of the smartest, most influential, most thoughtful, and most powerful people in the world today who are understanding the deep global trends reshaping our world today and going inside the zeitgeist. So we're trying to offer you some radical ideas to help you win the future. And our guest today is one of the most influential, one of the most powerful people you might never have heard of. He is Matthew Prince, the CEO and co-founder of a company called Cloudflare that provides the essential infrastructure, like a utility company, for around about a quarter of the entire internet. And we talk about what he means and what we all mean when we talk about the AI revolution, how it's disrupting business models everywhere, how it's already changing your internet experience, and also why he has made the extraordinary decision to say that AI bots will not automatically be allowed to scrape content and data and ideas from the websites of the companies that Cloudflare supports. And there's a lot of those companies. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Matthew Prince of Cloudflare. Right, Matthew, it's so nice to see you. Welcome. Should I say welcome to London? But you're here for a few days.
I'm here for a few days. Yeah.
Okay, and you're talking about trust and transparency, and you're talking about the future of the internet. One of the things which I know you've been speaking out about a lot recently is the feeling that the kind of deal which existed in the internet for the past really 20 odd years, which involved being able to monetize traffic and reach people getting to your website, is under huge pressure. And it's under huge pressure in a way that you, I think, saw a little bit earlier than other people because of artificial intelligence. And we could talk about the macro potential kind of consequences of artificial intelligence quite separately to this. But there's something quite specific that I want to start with, if I could, with you, which is that we've basically had this deal, which is that if eyeballs get to your website, you can monetize that and you can create a business. You can do it by selling subscriptions, having a paywall, saying you must, if you want to have access to a fantastic podcast, you've got to pay us before you can get it, or you can sell advertising against it. And there's also a different kind of payment, which is a nice little ego boost. You kind of feel, good about the fact that people are seeing your stuff. Can you just explain for us why that model of the internet, which has really reigned supreme for 20 odd years, is under pressure?
Yeah. So the internet's going through a massive transition right now. And I think that transition is inevitable because at the end of the day, it's better for users. And that transition is that we're moving from an internet where, as you tried to discover things on it, you used search engines, and we're all familiar with Google or Bing or the various search engines that are out there. And search engines, you would type a query in, and then it would give you back essentially a treasure map of 10 links. And the search wasn't over when you got the map. You then, as a user, had to click on those links and search around to find whatever answer it is. So if you wanted to see, when was Cloudflare founded, you type that in, give you back 10 links. You'd go click on it. You'd read through various articles, and then you'd find the answer to that. And in that process of engaging and searching on that treasure map, you generated traffic, and then content creators like yourself and others could monetize that through advertisements, through subscriptions, or just, again, as you said, a lot of the content online is done just because you want to know that what you're putting out in the world is actually being consumed. And so, my wife and I own a small newspaper. Our writers don't get paid based on how many people read their articles, but they're all obsessed with, how many page views am I getting? How many people are coming and reading my thing? Because that's part of what's important about being a content creator.
Every writer is. So George Orwell, who I suppose you could call a content creator, in his seminal essay, Why I Write, wrote, "My initial concern is to get a hearing."
That's right.
You don't write to be in a vacuum or a void. You write to be read.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of the experience that we've had online, and that deal that you would put content out there, and in exchange you could either make money or you could get famous from having done that. That deal is what has generated the internet that we have today. But that deal is changing, and you can actually see it by just watching any sci-fi movie. Some sci-fi movie you imagine has a helpful robot. and you say I'd like a recipe for cookies, the robot doesn't come back and say, here are 10 links and maybe you can find it somewhere. The robot comes back and says, here's a recipe for cookies. And that once upon a time was science fiction. But if you look at the AI companies today, you look at something like ChatGPT, you look at Anthropic, you look even at what Google is becoming, where they're putting AI overviews at the top of the page. Instead of it giving you a treasure map, instead of it being a search engine, this is becoming an answer engine. And the difference of that is that if you want to say, okay, what did Amol talk about on his podcast today? The answer engine will tell you, but there's no human who has had to go and actually listen to your podcast.
I mean, there's a commercial consequence of that, which is that the lack of traffic means that all those people can't monetize the reach. There's also just a sort of almost a neurological consequence, which is that you're not having to do any thinking. I mean, the AI overview is kind of giving you an answer. And previously, if you wanted to work out when Cloudflare was set up, you might go to the Cloudflare website, you might go to Wikipedia, you might go to others, you might verify, you might do some thinking. And of course, if most humans, or most of human history would suggest, if humans can opt out of doing some thinking, they're quite keen to do that. But how did you come to realize that this was a growing phenomenon, and actually the complaints people were maybe making to you, which is, hey, Matthew, I'm using your stuff, but people aren't coming to me as much as they used to. Suddenly you realize actually they're telling the truth.
Yeah, I think that so first of all, I think you're right that it is inevitable that this is going to be the case, because again, whether you're thinking or not, you're getting the answer faster and you're getting what you want a little bit faster, and that for 95% of users, 95% of the time is a better experience.
It's convenient.
And so people are going, this is what the future is going to look like. I don't think we can hold back progress. There are going to be answer engines and they're going to replace search engines. And that's what the future is going to look like. What we started to hear, because we have so many clients, is at first media companies coming to us and just saying, we're getting killed. And our business primarily is to protect against cyber attacks, the Chinese or the Russians or the North Koreans or the Iranians, hacking folks. And so when they were like, we have this new threat and it's AI companies, my first reaction was, oh God, it's media companies. That, roll my eyes. They're just complaining about new technology again. They're such Luddites. Like, what's
journalists,
wrong?
Luddites?
Yeah.
Seriously. Hey, you're in the BBC now, boss.
Yeah. And so, I think that was my first reaction. And company after company after company said, just go pull the data. And so we did. And people might not totally understand how search engines work, but the way that they work is essentially they have a little robot or what might be called a crawler or a bot that's going around and visiting everything on the internet. And so Google every day is making billions of requests to access all of the content of the internet, and it gets a copy of everything that has been created, and then uses that to build an index, which is what the search engine is. And then when you search, it returns the results that you see. And so the deal has been that you let Google copy your content in exchange for appearing in their treasure map that they
You get the visibility.
That's right. And so we can see for the last 10 years what the ratio of how much Google crawls that content, Google takes it, versus how many page views, how many visitors they actually send you. And the ratio 10 years ago was they crawled 2 pages for every 1 visitor that they sent you. So they crawled 2, they sent you 1 visitor. Over that period of time, that has gotten much, much worse. So today it's up to almost 20 to 1. They crawl 20 pages for every 1 visitor. What's changed? AI overviews. Because that then says, I don't have to click on anything. I don't have to go anywhere. I get the answer right there. And that's the good news for publishers. If you look at folks like OpenAI with ChatGPT, they're at 1,500 crawls for every 1 visitor that they send you. If you look at something like Anthropic, it's 40,000 crawls for every 1 visitor you send you. And just from a fairness perspective, like that's cost to the BBC. That's cost to content creators. They have to pay for all of that crawled content, and yet they're not getting anything in exchange. They're not getting the traffic. And the world over time is going to move to these answer engines. And as it does, it means that the deal that content creators have with them, it has to change.
So the world that is, if you talk about the way in which the world is moving, the world is moving towards a kind of answer engine rather than search engine approach,
right.
isn't it? Because ChatGPT, which is, ChatGPT was the moment that really crystallized in a lot of people's minds because consumers used it. The AI is a real thing. It's not just some weird Silicon Valley chat. And it's grown extraordinarily. I think it's up to 800 million monthly users out of nowhere. An astonishing thing. If you'd have said to me, we're going to launch a product in this room today, and you said in a couple of years' time, 800 million people will be using it every month, you say that's basically unprecedented. But it works because the product is good.
That's right.
Dario Amodei, the boss of Anthropic, was on this program and didn't put this particular point to them. But what they would say is, A, they comply with all the regulations and all the laws that they're required to. B, they often do credit the sources where they get this information from. So if you use Claude, which is the chatbot from Anthropic, when it's kind of, if you ask, when was Cloudflare set up or how good looking is Amol Rajan, they will kind of have a little thing where they say where they're searching the web and they might give you some sources. They are still, in their view, providing some visibility to people who otherwise might not get it. That's their position.
Sure. And again, I think we can't dispute that these products are good. That for a lot of consumers, they're providing real value. But the problem is, you need to eat, right? There needs to be some business model where content creators are compensated for what they are delivering. And if it's not going to be from traffic, it needs to be from something else. And I think there are sort of three possible futures that we could have. The bleakest is you starve to death and die, right? Because nobody is actually paying you to create content anymore because it's just getting all sucked up into the answer engines. I think that's pretty unlikely because the answer engines need the content. It is incredibly valuable for them to have that content. It's the fuel that actually makes these things run. And so
in the end, they've got an incentive to make sure that we can feed ourselves.
That's exactly right. So I think the good news is journalists, academics, researchers, there's a business model. It's going to be a different business model, but a business model will emerge. So what are the possibilities for that? I think that the sort of Black Mirror potential future, which is really scary, because I think it's pretty likely, is that instead of there being hundreds of thousands of independent content creators, that we don't go back to a media time of 30 years ago. We actually go back to a media time of the 1400s, the Medicis, where there are 5 powerful families. And if you want to, paint the Sistine Chapel, you've got to, be associated with one of those families. But instead of them being families, there'll be AI companies. And again, there will be a liberal one, there will be a conservative one, there will be a Chinese one. And you can imagine that they will be the ones who decide what content gets created. They'll essentially be the patrons of content creation. And it's not crazy to think about. Like, how can you imagine Sam Altman from OpenAI deciding to stand up his own version of the Associated Press? A lot of out of work journalists these days would cost not that much relative to what they're spending on GPUs or AI.
GPUs, the general processing units, which is what powers.
That's right. The silicon that is there, where there's literally spending $10 billion a year. You could have a lot of newspapers for that. A lot of newspapers for $10 billion a year, and that I think is actually a really potential outcome that we have. But think about how regressive that is. If the internet was all about democratizing information, about spreading it, making it accessible to anyone, making it so that everyone could go in any direction, if all of a sudden content gets siloed behind a small handful of different AI companies, and your view of the world is completely dictated by which one you are subscribed to, that I think is actually an even more polarized and even more dangerous world than the one that we're living in.
So that's the bleak outlook, if I'm right. What are the other two potential scenarios you see?
Well, so there's the you don't eat outlook. That's the bleakest. There's the Black Mirror outlook, which is we go back to sort of 5 powerful AI companies that control all that. I think what we're trying to play for is something else, which is, okay, traffic isn't going to be the currency anymore. It has to be something else. And so how do we create incentives where the AI companies say, we need to pay content creators for the content that they're creating in order for our systems to have access to it? And there needs to be some value exchange where if you are creating content that you're not going to get as much ad revenue. You're not going to get as much subscription revenue. But let's create a new source of revenue, which is some fraction of every person who's subscribing to an AI company. Some fraction of that goes back to the content creators, which is the fuel that makes those AI companies work.
So for the last, for about nearly 6.5 years, I covered technology for the BBC, and one of the central stories of the time, this was in the around the time of huge concerns about whether, content moderation, Cambridge Analytica, undue influence, and all that sort of thing. One of the big arguments was between publishers and these platforms who said, so publishers, Rupert Murdoch's company, classically,
Yep.
News Corp in America, News UK in the UK, would say, Facebook and Google, you're stealing our stuff.
Yep.
We pay the journalists, we train them up, we hire them, we pay them to go out and get this stuff, and you're stealing our stuff, and you should damn well pay us for it. And Facebook, I know I was in the middle of this argument, and Facebook would say to them and to me, we're not stealing their stuff. We don't need their stuff, by the way. News is a tiny fraction of what's on Facebook. Most of Facebook is pictures of your grandma or your mum or your cat.
Yep.
And we're helping them by providing them with a window which sends them a lot of traffic, which makes them relevant in this new world. Now, that argument never quite got settled, but it's an extension of the logic that you've just articulated, that if you're a news publisher concerned about Facebook ripping off your stuff and not entirely persuaded that being on Facebook's newsfeed or in Google search is sufficient payment, if you're a news publisher, you've got to be infinitely more worried about the coming world of AI, where you've got to be saying to Anthropic, who are in charge of Claude, and Dario Amodei, or Sam Altman and OpenAI, you've got to pay for our content.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't, you've got nothing, and we've starved to death. That's why we're beginning to see some deals, aren't we, where people like Rupert Murdoch's companies are coming forward and saying, you need to pay us. What's your sense of whether or not that new world, that good outcome that you want to see happen, is beginning to emerge?
Yeah, so the argument that the News Corps of the world made against the Facebooks and Googles actually always kind of rang hollow to me, because they were at least sending traffic back. They were generating that. Now, was it as much traffic as they would have gotten before, or were they at some level disintermediating the relationship with the reader or the viewer? Maybe, but the threat that the AI companies pose is so much larger. Again, 40,000 copies of your stuff for every one visitor they send you back.
As opposed to 2 to 1.
As opposed to 2 to 1, right? That is the real, this is the real threat. So that argument that was before, I never didn't have much sympathy to, but this one I think is a real existential threat to the publishers first, but actually to a lot of other businesses as well. What people don't appreciate is that AI is really a platform change. So if we start with the web, and then after the web, we had social, and then after social, we had mobile. Each of those were platform changes. They were changing the interface through which you consumed information. So once upon a time, I've been on your laptop, and then it was through a social media site, and then it was through your mobile phone and apps on your phone. And each of those was a platform change. It was possible for people to see. What I don't think people appreciate is AI is a similar platform change, where in the future, the way that you're going to get information is you're going to ask your helpful chatbot. And we're already seeing people move to that. What's different, though, about this platform is that this is a platform with an opinion for the first time. And what that's going to do is it's going to sit between you and, yes, media companies first. But what happens to what happens to a booking.com? Like, what value do they have anymore? Anyone who's aggregating information together. What happens to a brand? Like, what do brands mean in a world where you tell your agent, hey, go buy me eggs, or go buy me milk, or go buy me something like that? There's no relationship between you as the human and what were effectively shortcuts for quality, which is what brands are.
This is agentic AI, which for some of our listeners is an idea rather than a reality. What is the kind of agentic AI, i.e. kind of your chatbot friend? What are the sorts of things that you're getting your agentic AI to do at the moment, which you think more and more of our listeners will be doing?
I mean, I think you're already being able to do things like, how do I pull together a family vacation? Where should we stay? Where should we eat? What activities should we do? And right now, for the most part, that's just pulling together, here's it, and then you have to go out and buy it. But it is an inevitable step that the agent will then do that buying for you. And again, that's good. That's an amazing experience. but it's also going to change fundamentally business models. And so what I think is encouraging about this is traffic, which is the business model that the internet has been built on so far, has always been a really poor proxy for quality. Like there's a lot of things. Someone's in a car wreck on the side of the road. Like we all stop and stare at it. That's not good. Like that's not us at our best. Whereas what we're seeing from AI is that AI is actually, for the first time in human history, created effectively a mathematical model of all of human knowledge, right? And at the same time, it has also shown us where there are gaps and holes in human knowledge, right? Where I picture like a giant block of Swiss cheese, right? There's a lot of cheese, but there's a lot of holes in the cheese. And going forward, if the business model of content creation, business model of many things, is about to significantly change as the platform of AI shifts to how we consume information, how we shop, how we do everything online. As we do that, there's an opportunity for us to fix some of the problems of the last business model, where, again, traffic and a lot of how media organizations have made money today is writing headlines that make us angry, that make us have to click on them, that divide us apart. Whereas if you imagine a future where the business model is, how do we find those holes in the cheese and we actually fill them, and the people who create that content get rewarded, that's actually a really optimistic future.
So what is the mechanism by which is a very hopeful idea, by which artificial intelligence could break the link between traffic, stop traffic being seen as a quality for a proxy for quality, and AI could actually promote more intelligent material?
So the best thing I've kind of come up with is an analogy to when other parts of media were really disrupted.
I like the Swiss cheese analogy.
Swiss cheese is good.
That's good.
but look at the music industry. So 22 years ago, before Steve Jobs steps on stage and launches iTunes, 99 cents a song, the entire music industry, the market cap, how much it was worth, was about $8 billion US, which is a lot of money. But I mean, that's the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and I mean that's everything, $8 billion. And then, and at the time, piracy was rampant. People were just sort of saying music is getting devalued. You had Napster, you had all these things. And then Apple launches iTunes, 99 cents a song, says we're going to compete with the pirates. We're going to come up with a new business model. Turns out that's not the business model that ends up winning, but you kind of have to go through that stage in order to get to Spotify. Spotify is, closer to, £10 a month and all you can eat access to things. And Spotify alone last year sent $10 billion US to music creators around the world. And that's just Spotify. There's also Apple Music and Tidal and YouTube and TikTok. So the music industry is worth way more because technology has invented this new business model for it,
right,
than it was before. And there are different winners and losers. And there are people who are angry at Spotify because they say, well, we should be being paid more or less. But you can't dispute the fact that there is more money going into creating music today than there was just 20 years ago. And so I flew up to Stockholm to meet with Daniel Ek, who's the founder of Spotify. No one has compensated creators at scale like Daniel. It's just incredible. And I was talking to him, and he told me the story that has just stuck with me, which is that, if you're on Spotify and you search for Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, like they know they're going to return like a result that is what you're looking for. On the other hand, if you search for something like, I want a song to a disco beat about how much fun it is to dance with your cat, they don't have much, but they know they don't have that much. They know that they've effectively found one of the holes in the cheese. And so what they do is they actually take that query and they publish it back to music creators. And there are several, like many music creators that are making millions of dollars a year. That he told me about one guy who's making 40 million euros a year just writing songs for unfulfilled Spotify queries. And I think that's beautiful because when you search for a song, what you're searching for is an emotion. And if you can't find it, then there's sort of a hole that's left. And these people are actually writing content to fill those holes. And I think that provides the beginnings of the ingredients for how we can remake the media industry in an age of AI to say what's really valuable is filling in the holes in the cheese. And that's, I think, the beginning of how we figure this
quite
out.
Remarkable decision.
And what I'm encouraged by is if you talk to the founders of Anthropic, you talk to the founders of OpenAI, you talk to Google, you talk to Microsoft,
websites
what
that you
they
are
want
a critical part of the infrastructure of.
Very reputable,
decision, how you came
very
to that decision,
unique,
and trustworthy.
And that's
just worth going back.
But it's not just trust; it's also uniqueness.
It's been 15 years, multi-billion-dollar revenue. You're the critical infrastructure for between 20 and 25% of the internet. I don't know why I'm quoting these numbers back at you. If all the Cloudflare users daily in the world got together, it would be a very big country, right?
Yeah. We see about 6 billion people pass through our network every month, which is essentially the entire online population.
What do you do?
What do
What does Cloudflare do?
We make the internet faster and protect it from bad guys. And so when we're doing our job right, your internet just seems a little bit faster. You're less likely to get scammed online, and we protect. Yeah, most of our customers are either content creators or companies that are putting something, making it accessible online, and then their customers are the ones that flow through our network to be able to access whatever they're on.
And you, as a company, 15 years ago, you were above a nail salon in Palo Alto, which is just near San Francisco. It's heart of Silicon Valley. There were 8 of you back then. You've grown extraordinarily big, and you are, in ways that I was sort of checking out in advance of our conversation, deeply mission-driven. You know, part of what you do actually came about from a meeting that you had with 3 journalists, I think. From was it the Committee to Protect Journalists? And one was from Angola, and one was from Ethiopia, and one couldn't say where they're from because they're getting followed by death squads. The
first meeting I'd ever been in, the term "death squad" had been used. Unfortunately, not the last.
And I think you said goodbye to these journalists in a sort of cab outside New York, and you kind of turn around maybe to your co-founder, because I think the meeting with them had been slightly longer than you'd anticipated, and you sort of thought, this is what we're about. We're about getting the internet to people who are going to otherwise be denied.
Well, being a journalist in a lot of parts of the world is a really dangerous profession.
It's very easy sat in the West to pretend that, to moan about it, but at least we're free to report what we want.
That's right. And these journalists were covering government corruption in their home countries. And there were a lot of people that wanted to silence them. And they all came to us, and they had tears in their eyes and said, we can't do what we do without Cloudflare. And we didn't start the company to protect journalists. We started the company because we thought, let's do something that takes advantage of this opportunity in the market, and hopefully we'll make some money and impress our parents. Why most people start things, and yet here we were, where these people couldn't be doing the important work they were doing without us. And at that moment, it really just sort of changed kind of our focus, where we realized that this was bigger. And then I think the internet is bigger than any of us totally appreciate. And as one of the real guardians of the internet, I think that's what drives everyone who works at Cloudflare.
But when you set up Cloudflare, you say it was about impressing your parents. I hope they were impressed, by the way, as they ought to have been. But what was the opportunity that you saw?
The funny thing is that what my alternative was my dad owned a bunch of restaurants, and he was getting older and wanted to retire. And so he called me up and said, son, it's time for you to take over the family restaurants. And they just, not only were they not very good restaurants, he owned, for example, the only Hooters in Utah. And I couldn't imagine anything worse than running my dad's Hooters. It just wasn't my passion.
I'm afraid you're going to have to explain Hooters to a British
audience. It's a place that sells chicken wings and has women that don't wear many clothes.
Oh, right.
So it's I think there's got to be a Hooters in London.
It's probably they're thinking about it now. It all comes flooding back.
And so not again what I wanted to do. But again, my dad had provided for our family, and so felt some obligation. So whether proud or not, I think he's still a little angry that I didn't take over the family business. But it all worked out. So I think we were really said that, and again, this is a little bit wonky, but you could see that software was moving from something that you bought and got a physical copy of to moving to the cloud. Companies like Salesforce doing that. You could see that hardware, like the servers that you used to have to buy, those were moving to the cloud as well. So what we just thought was inevitable was that the networking gear, the firewalls, and all those things would also have to move to the cloud as well. And so the original idea of Cloudflare was, how do you take a firewall and put it in the cloud?
And you've evolved because of your scale. You're now between 20 and 25% of the internet depends on you. You're a huge company. And you've evolved, if I may say, into a phrase you used a moment ago, which is something of guardians of a particular vision of the internet. And you made in that context, and in the context of all we're discussing about the development of AI, a quite remarkable decision, which is that you said AI bots will not be allowed to scrape the data from websites that are protected by Cloudflare technology. Can you just explain precisely what was the decision you made and why did you make it?
So it comes back to where we started with the conversations with media companies, where they said our businesses are getting killed because people are taking our data, they're using it to give answers in their answer engines, but they're not sending us anything back. They're not paying us. They're not sending us traffic that we can monetize in one way or another. And so we started to think about, what could happen. And again, we walked through and we said, done right, we could create a new market and a new business model, which might not only be better for media companies, but might be better for society as a whole, where we get away from kind of the rage baiting, dividing media that we have today back to rewarding real content creation. And the question is, how do you get there? And you need a market. And the challenge is that no markets can exist without scarcity. There's not a market for air unless you're scuba diving, right? Because there's no air underwater, so you have to pay someone to put air in a tank, and then you breathe that air, and they make money from the scarcity of air, right? If every media company is just giving their content away for free, and they're letting anyone take it, and they're not getting anything back, then there will never be a market. And so in order for us to get to that better media place, in order for us to understand that, we said we have to restrict this. And the media companies, again, because they don't have the same technical sophistication often as someone like Cloudflare does, they didn't have the tools to be able to do that. And we really do believe that, again, coming back to those journalists who are covering government corruption, coming back to the small local newspaper that we own, we think that media is such a critical part of society and it deserves to be protected. And so we said, we need to engage in this, and we need to take all we've learned from stopping, hackers around the world and apply that to help media companies have the ability to stop these AI bots, create scarcity. And then hopefully what emerges is not a world where all the media, all the journalists starve to death, not a world where all the media gets locked up behind 5 different AI companies, but one where there's a fair exchange of value, where if you're creating original content, you're paid for it. And again, I think the first step in doing that is you've got to actually restrict the crawlers.
All such decisions, particularly one of such immense scale and consequence, are trade-offs. They involve, frankly, pissing a lot of people off.
Yeah.
When you were considering those trade-offs, what did you anticipate as the potential downsides which you've had to deal with?
I think the first is, I think there's a little bit of a misperception that we just blocked AI crawlers generally. What we actually did was I think a lot more thoughtful, which is we went and we looked at what pages behind us were either behind a subscription or had an advertisement on them. Because in those cases, that's an indication that the purpose of that page is to get a human to go to it to either see the advertisement, make money off that, or pay for the subscription. And in those cases, that should be blocked. On the other hand, the defaults really matter. And so what we said was, we're going to default that if you're a media company making money through ads or subscriptions, we're going to default to block. You can override that. You can say, no, I just want to contribute to artificial general intelligence. And so that's why I, do podcasts, or that's why I write the stories that I do. But by default, we're going to block those things. Things that aren't advertised based, things that aren't subscriptions, we're going to leave that open. But again, you can say, listen, don't like this AI stuff. We're going to shut my content off. And that's a decision up to you. We're providing the tools and setting the defaults that we think make sense to help build what is the future of an internet, which is more sustainable, is better than the internet that we have today.
How do you contend with the criticism or pushback that though that might produce a better internet in some ways, at this current moment in history, it's a sort of dangerous thing to put blocks on the innovation prompted by AI? That anything that sort of places a limit on where AI can scrape away and provide data is both against, there's a liberal argument against it, which is that people, as you say, want these services,
Yeah.
and they want the best possible, chatbot to give them the best possible information to organize the best possible holiday as agentic AI, but also that there's an economic danger
Yeah.
potentially, even though you've made your decision for principled reasons, you say, there's an economic hazard in putting a sort of blocker on AI in some way.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of blockers on AI. If you want to get chips from NVIDIA, Jensen makes you pay for them.
Jensen Huang,
Jensen, who is the CEO and founder of NVIDIA. If you want, if you want to get the best researchers, they get salaries. We're not going to say, oh, AI is so important that we're going to bring back slavery, right? That doesn't make any sense. So I don't understand why, if the content that someone like you is producing is the fuel that's running these things, why is it they have to pay for the chips, they have to pay for the researchers, but they don't have to pay for the content? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so I think unless you're going to go to the extreme of saying, let's nationalize this and basically conscript everyone to work on it because it's that important, which is absurd. Then of course the people who are creating the content that fuels these answer engines should be getting compensated for it.
I think a lot of people, especially those listening to this, will be sympathetic to your arguments and say it sounds like a principled decision, and it is, the sort of impulse to make sure creators get a fair shake seems one that a lot of people would say is just common sense as well as the decent thing. It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that Matthew Prince is making these decisions? I mean, not because you're not in any way morally qualified, but it's a huge responsibility for you to make. And one of the criticisms of the broader internet, which I think is more applied to people like the Jensen Huangs or the Zuckerbergs or the Elon Musks, is that we have created this world in which a few people with extraordinary wealth and power are making decisions that have enormous consequence for the whole globe. And even when those decisions are ones that people might approve of, as they might approve of what you're saying, who are you guys to make the decisions?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, first of all, we didn't make this decision on our own. We met with BBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, every possible journal, the Associated Press, and talked to them about what's the right thing to do here. And again, I don't think of this as us sort of saying, this is, you can't scrape the internet. There's lots of the internet that's not behind Cloudflare. But the reason so much of the internet is behind Cloudflare is because we're out there standing up for people like content creators. We're actually saying this is a problem, and if we don't do something about it, that one of those bleak outcomes is pretty likely. And so I think we have a duty to be making these hard calls, even when they are hard calls. And this was, frankly, one of the easier calls that we made.
And you also have to abide by the law in all the different countries where you operate. And I think that's something that I saw looking online at the decisions that you had to make around whether or not neo-Nazi websites such as the Daily Stormer were able to use your technology.
Yep.
And I think it's important to demarcate or distinguish between the kind of decisions you would make, which I imagine working out if a neo-Nazi website can have your technology. As you say, you mostly provide it for people like Transport for London. So the neo-Nazi is probably 1 in 1,000 decisions.
It's
less than that.
The funny thing about that is, I never thought I'd know so much about neo-Nazis in my career and a bunch of other things. And for the most part, our job around content moderation is pretty easy.
Well, you're not really content moderators. I just wanted to, almost in your defense, say, if Mark Zuckerberg were here or if Elon Musk were here, those guys are actually facilitating mass production of content, and they're kind of making editorial decisions. Should this be allowed? Is that free speech? Is that inciting hatred? You're not doing that. And yet with the neo-Nazi website, which, as you say, is a tiny fraction of the many decisions you've got to make on a daily basis, but you did have something close to an editorial judgment to make about whether or not, about who should speak.
Yeah, and I think that's we've basically done that 3 times in the company's history. So sort of the mean time between these things is once every 5 years. So we're probably due for some controversy around this, any moment now. But what I think was different about what we did is it would have been very easy for us to fire the customer and then just, if anyone called us about it, say no comment, or it was a violation of our terms of service, or hand it off to the lawyers. And I actually think that's really dangerous. That's what most technology companies do. And I think it's part of why there's actually so little trust in technology companies, because even if they're being very thoughtful, and I think for the most part they are,
They're not transparent.
they're not transparent. I think, again, we're not a government, but we touch billions of people's lives. And so I think we have to think about how you build trust in a very similar way. And so transparency has always been one of our core values. And so when we make decisions where it would be easier to just say no comment, I get to talk about neo-Nazis.
And by the way, you do
other things.
podcasts. And one of the big, I mean, Elon Musk's pretty available to speak, but one of the other things about some of these companies that they have people that don't always talk openly about it. In the context of all that we've discussed and your desire for a better internet and for creators to get paid well, what have you made of the argument, if you've had a chance to follow it here in the UK, around AI and copyright laws? I don't know if you've seen it. There's a big old spat between creators and the government, and the government is approaching this, I think, as a trade-off. You know, on the one hand, you want to be seen to be pro-innovation, you want to allow sort of AI to do its business, and that's where some of the idea behind making technology firms exempt from copyright laws comes from. On the other hand, you've got really influential creators saying, you know what, we need to come together to make sure, almost like a union, that we get paid for our stuff.
Yeah.
What do you make of the debate that we've had, and where do you take a view on it?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a recovering intellectual property professor, so I you know I love a good copyright debate. But what I'll say is that typically, and I'm actually not an expert on UK copyright laws, but typically copyright laws protect fair use if you transform a work. So if I read, you know, if I read Hamlet and then I retell it sort of in a modern kind of, you know, London sort of Times way, like there's no copyright problem there. I've taken something and I've actually transformed it, which is kind of what the AI systems are doing. They're taking information, they're remixing it, and they're giving it back to you in a way that's there. And in that sense, I worry that copyright is the wrong tool to be able to get creators what they absolutely deserve. And if you look in the US, where a number of these cases have gone down, the best case that's out there, which was a case involving Anthropic, the most well-reasoned case so far has actually said, if you take information, you consume it, and then you recreate it, that's the same way that if I read a book and then write a story that was inspired by, but isn't actually a direct copy of, that's allowed. And so I worry that if creators lean too heavily on copyright, they might actually get a result which is not what they want. That isn't to say that content creators shouldn't be compensated. Absolutely, content creators should be compensated. And the good news is the AI companies, like, again, 80% of the AI companies are Cloudflare customers, so we know them really well as well. And we've talked to them. And what they have said over and over and over again is, if there is a level playing field, then we're happy to pay content creators. But they're worried about one thing. And this is actually, I think, the most interesting thing that's going on in the UK right now. There's one company that all of the other AI companies worry about. It's the reason why OpenAI was founded in the first place. When Sam Altman and Elon Musk got together and put together OpenAI, what they were afraid of was Google. That Google was so far ahead of everybody else in the content space that they had this enormous advantage. And today, the thing that is the company that is holding content creators back from being compensated more than anyone else is Google. And the reason why is that Google sort of struck the original deal with content creators, 27 years ago, where they said, we get a copy of your content in exchange for running a search engine where we'll send you traffic. So Google feels like they have almost a God-given right to have a copy of everyone's traffic. And they're gathering it up and they're using it for their AI systems. That's giving them a really unfair advantage in the AI space.
Presumably, among other things, I'd say we're still giving you unique visibility.
Mm-hmm.
Search is still dominant in the internet. Sure,
Yep.
AI and the answer engine as opposed to the search engine is coming. But if you're an artist, particularly a small artist, and you want some visibility, type in your name, the whole world can see it. And that's an incredible value.
Well, and I think that traditional search, where you type in a search and you get back a treasure map, that's one deal. and that should have one set of rules. And I think that that is a fair trade with content creators. Answer engines, where you type something in and you just get an answer, but you don't actually generate traffic, that's different. And Google is under an enormous amount of pressure and threat competitively from these new companies. And so they're sort of trying to run the past while also migrate into the future. And I think that what the UK may be in a unique position to do is to say, it's fine, you can do that, but you've got to split those things apart. If you take content for search, you can't use it for AI. And if you take content for AI, content creators have to be able to block that without blocking search. And if the UK does that, I think it actually might become the home to all content creators, where they're going to say, this is the place that is actually giving us protection, giving us a fair shake, creating that level playing field. And I think if we can get Google to split crawling for search from crawling for AI, that will be the final step that we need to take in order to get every AI company to say, okay, now we're ready to start paying content creators for the content they have. And this is a debate that is happening right now in the UK, and it's why I'm here wearing a suit.
Yes, fantastic to talk to you about it. So we've taken up a huge amount of time. I've got two quick final questions. One is that we spoke to Dario Amodei on this podcast a few weeks ago, and one of the things that he's achieved a bit of notoriety that he didn't really want to achieve for is around his not forecast or prediction, but his suggestion that AI was going to be a big threat to white collar jobs. The worry that lots of people, including white collar people who listen to this podcast, will have is that entry level jobs, which require kind of systematic thought, in the next few years potentially going to get wiped out in finance, management consultancy, law, and so on, and that artificial intelligence is coming for those jobs. Does that seem to you inevitable, as it does to lots of other people?
I actually don't think it is. As an example, we are heavy users of AI internally.
Of course. And have been before a lot of other people. You used machine learning years ago.
Yeah. And so one of the things, though, is how do we get people to really take advantage of it? And what we see is actually entry-level workers, our interns who come in, are often the best ambassadors to really bringing in the latest of AI. 50-year-old CEOs are stuck in our ways, whereas a brand new 21-year-old intern has actually a sort of new way of looking at the world, and there are going to be a massive productivity improvements that happen because of that. And for that reason, Cloudflare has massively expanded our internship program for this next coming year. So I actually think that you're going to see different ways of working, but I kind of think that whether we're all going to lose our jobs to AI or whether we're living in a James Cameron film and it's a Terminator, it's going to kill us all, I think those are distractions from the bigger point, which is this is a platform shift. And that platform, the same way that we went from your laptop and a browser to social to mobile, now we're going to go to AI. And that is going to fundamentally come after many business models that are out there. Those business models are going to change. Media is the canary in the coal mine. But what happens to brands? What happens to aggregators? What happens to small businesses that are out there? How is a small business, if agents are shopping, are you ever going to beat massive corporations that can optimize for that? I think those are the really interesting questions. And AI is going to come for the business models long before they come for our jobs, and long before they actually come for, turning us into the matrix or whatever.
On which point, a final point, I know that we have lots of young listeners to this podcast, many of whom would love nothing more than to be a tech entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And you've been on this extraordinary story from studying English to begin with, to being a professor, to sort of a couple of missteps, or not missteps, but honourable failures. Missteps in the world of business.
The crazy thing, 18 years ago, I was a bartender. So don't follow my path. That's probably not the right thing to do.
And I don't know if you feel you should not have gone to business school, but I just wonder if we could end with your sort of what you've learned, having grown a very successful company, advice to young entrepreneurs listening to this who want to win in this new world, who feel kind of both exhilarated and somewhat exhausted by all this chat about AI, but who are thinking about setting up their own company and being pretty radical with it.
I mean, the big unlock for me was that the people who you want to have as your teammates aren't necessarily the people who are your friends. There's a temptation to like go and start a company with like your mates who, cheer for the same team and are about the same age and went to the same schools. But it turns out that if you're all the same, then you end up just fighting all the time over who's in charge. The org chart might say whatever, but you're all the same. So, a roll of the dice, it could have been someone else as the CEO and and a different thing. What was really powerful about Cloudflare, and I think the secret to our success, is that the three of us who started it, we had a ton of respect for each other, but we were radically different. Michelle, one of my co-founders, she is incredibly organized. She gets things done. She knows how to scale. Those are not my strengths. My strengths are, I can tell a good story. I can sort of think about what the future is going to look like. I'm always generating ideas. That's not her strength. And so we were different then. Or she is just and to this day, we're obviously friends because we've gone through this. But back in the day, like we wouldn't have hung out together. And so then the big question is, how do you find those people? Because it's not going to be the people that you necessarily went to school with. And so my advice would be, go places that are growing like crazy. And while you're there, don't look for the people who necessarily root for the same sports team as you do, but really internally recognize what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and find those other puzzle pieces around you that complement, fill in kind of the holes in your own personal cheese, and that can make you better. And again, that was the secret to Cloudflare's success.
Are all the internships for this year already locked up?
No. We just applications are they just opened applications at the end of September. So we'll
I think you'll be flooded after this comes out.
Plenty of time to apply, and we are definitely hiring in our office in London.
Matthew, it's fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
What an extraordinary conversation, and what an extraordinary figure and person and leader Matthew Prince of Cloudflare is. He mentioned Google, and I think it's worth your knowing that just last week here in the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority designated Google with strategic market status in general search. Strategic market status in general search, that includes AI overview and AI mode, and that means the CMA, this influential regulator, can introduce targeted measures to address specific aspects of how Google operates its search services in the UK. Now, Google, for its part, says that many of the ideas for interventions that have been raised in this process would inhibit UK innovation and growth. A familiar argument from the tech companies, not saying it's right or wrong, but it's one they've deployed for many years, and that they say that too much excessive regulation would potentially slow product launches at a time of extraordinary innovation driven by AI. So the company also disputes the claim from Matthew Prince that traffic to websites has fallen since the launch of AI Overview. In fact, Google says that and I quote, the total organic click volume from Google search to websites has been relatively stable year over year. Remember that if you do enjoy Radical, you can listen to us as a podcast on the move. You just head to BBC Sounds and you search for Radical with Amol Rajan, hit subscribe, and make sure your push notifications are turned on. We'll be back at the same time next week with another episode. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.